sphagnum moss. That was really stupid. Hey guys, today I want to talk about sphagnum moss. As you guys probably already know, that sphagnum is my favorite substrate to pot my plants in, and I do think it's a really great way to heal plants, which I do have a video coming out soon about healing your plants with sphagnum moss and kind of my process for bringing my struggling plants back to life with this incredible substrate. But before we get into the plants, huge thank you to Skillshare for making today's video possible. Skillshare is an online platform that helps us continue our learning. I personally have been using Skillshare for over 2 years now, and I've learned so much. There are a variety of different categories to learn from with Skillshare, and I myself have learned about photography, productivity, animation. I am currently working through a ton of productivity courses on Skillshare. My favorite ones are taught by Thomas Frank. I think he lays out information very well and in a motivating way. Highly recommend. So whether it be the Thomas Frank productivity course or an entirely different topic that interests you, right now is a great time to get started on Skillshare, because the first 1,000 of you to click the link in my description box or use code HARLIG will get a free 1-month trial of Skillshare. Highly recommend giving it a go. Thank you so much, Skillshare. But let's get back into the plants. I think it was really important that I talk about the sphagnum moss, sphagnum peat moss sustainability debate. And okay, in the world of plant keeping, there are so many different products that we can buy and use for our plants, where it is a hobby centered around like life on earth. It's important that we use products that aren't like further harming the earth, if that makes sense. Of course, if we're keeping plants, like we want the best for our planet. I mean, I'm assuming that if you love plants, you care about the planet itself, right? Plants, planet, they go hand in hand. I did just want to touch on this, as I've gotten quite a few comments when I'm talking about my long fiber sphagnum moss in videos and how unsustainable it is. And I guess jumping right into it, first and foremost, long fiber sphagnum moss is not the same as sphagnum peat moss. Yes, they are grown in the same like bogs around the world, and technically it is the same plant, but the process for harvesting and then also the amount of time it takes for us to be able to harvest long fiber sphagnum moss as opposed to sphagnum peat moss is much different. I wish I had peat moss here I could show you. I'll try to find something I can use online to show you an example of what it looks like when you buy sphagnum peat moss. It is definitely more sandy in texture. It's not at all like this. So that is the difference. The long fiber is like grown like this. It is live plant that is harvested and dried out and compressed, dehydrated to get to be able to get it into our homes. And then the sphagnum peat moss is actually decaying sphagnum moss. So yes, it comes from the same plant. Back to the comments I get on a lot of my videos. I've gotten comments about how sphagnum peat moss destroys the ecosystem where it's harvested, which yes, that's not wrong, but this is actually an entirely different process to harvest, like I said, than sphagnum peat. And going forward, I am just going to refer to sphagnum peat moss as peat moss. Is long fiber sphagnum sustainable? Yes and no. Kind of depends on where you buy it from. I personally prefer to buy it from New Zealand. The laws protecting the bogs where sphagnum moss is harvested are a lot stricter there. You can have more confidence in knowing that your moss is harvested more sustainably. I guess kind of the thing I was trying to get to with not wanting to destroy the planet with this hobby that kind of revolves around like plant life on the planet. Pretty much everything has its issues is what I'm trying to get at. So every product we use has its issues. So really it comes down to picking the issues that we feel are most important or are least negatively impacting the environment and roll with it. So yeah, that is why I prefer to use this as opposed to peat moss or some other like cocoa coir, some other substrates that you can buy on the market. Yeah, let me tell you about why I prefer the long fiber sphagnum. So long fiber sphagnum is the live plant that grows at the top of bogs and like swampy areas. In the United States, the only place where sphagnum moss is harvested commercially is actually Wisconsin, which I find kind of wild. Okay, getting into the difference in sustainability between long fiber and peat moss. So again, like I said, it comes from the same plant, sphagnum moss, which is why it's known as sphagnum peat and long fiber sphagnum. The difference is the long fiber sphagnum is harvested while it's alive, where the peat is what has decayed and compacted down at the base of these bogs and swampy areas where the plant naturally grows. So something to consider about the difference in sustainability between the two is that peat moss takes years to decay. So, I mean, it's not like the plant just dies and then it becomes peat. It is decomposing for years and years, whereas the moss grows all the time and can be harvested once it's grown to a certain point. Oh, and I should also say the peat at the bottom, so like even though it's marketed as sphagnum peat moss, it isn't necessarily just sphagnum moss. There are actually other things are decomposing into the base of these bogs and swampy areas. So you definitely aren't getting like purely decomposed sphagnum moss. Just something to note. I never really considered that, which like logically, duh, but my illogical brain never thought of that. So here we are. I thought I'd spew that to you as well. Yes, it takes years and years for the plant to decay to the point that it can be harvested and sold commercially as sphagnum peat moss. On the time factor, long fiber sphagnum is much more sustainable. Moving on to the actual harvesting methods, where the long fiber sphagnum is the live plant that grows up, it can be easily cut, dried, dehydrated, compressed into the bricks that you have to, you know, hydrate for them to like puff up and turn into this stuff. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the way peat moss is commercially harvested is usually they will drain these bogs and swamps, or they'll just dig as deep down as they can into these bogs and swamps to scoop it out. It is very damaging to the surrounding ecosystem, especially if they're having to drain the water out to be able to harvest all of that peat moss at the bottom. Can you imagine how many organisms are impacted? And while that's not the only way they can harvest peat moss, it is the most universally used way. I don't know, in my opinion, nothing we use is going to be perfect. I know a lot of people recommend using coco coir. Coco coir is harvested as a result of a lot of deforestation type things. So I mean, everything has its own problems when you look into it. It's just a matter of trying to make the best decision with the information we have available, which fortunately we have the internet, so we have a lot of information available. So I just think that that's kind of something that maybe not a lot of people know. Like I said, I do get a lot of comments about how terrible sphagnum moss is for the environment, and while I'm not disagreeing with that, I just think a lot of people are confusing long fiber with peat, and there is quite a drastic difference, even though they do come from the same plant, sphagnum moss. Love this substrate. I think it's amazing. It's incredible. I have a video coming out soon about how to actually revive your long fiber sphagnum moss, how to make it come back to life. I'm going to show you it actually. I found a couple of little things. So here is a little Dischidia ovata. You can see the sphagnum. I'm actually going to pull it off and put it on my hand. I think it'll be easier to see this way. Don't worry, I can put this back into the container and it'll just continue growing like nothing even happened. No harm, no foul. Okay, so here is what a strand of live sphagnum moss looks like. I mean, obviously it's tiny. This is just a little beginning guy. It's just barely come back to life, but it will get bigger and bigger. And yeah, that is what living sphagnum moss looks like in its infancy. And then it just gets bigger and thicker and wider until it's like this, thick and wide and ready to be dehydrated, you know? And then also here's this one. This one did get a little bit dry, so it's not as green, but yeah, like there is living sphagnum moss. So yeah, I'm really excited for this video to come out. Like I said, I have a lot of sphagnum related videos coming out here soon. I use it in a lot of my videos. I love the substrate. Like I probably sound crazy how obsessed I am with sphagnum moss. Like, don't get me wrong, I use soil and stuff too, but long fiber sphagnum is the route I prefer to go, especially for plants that I personally struggle with. I think it's a really incredible growing medium. It's amazing because it can be brought back to life, like my little mossy peace friends here that are coming back to life. I don't know, I just think it's really cool. It's really fun. It's really forgiving in a lot of ways that other substrates are not. I know it's not for everybody, but the information in this video is why I'm okay with using long fiber sphagnum and not peat peat sphagnum or sphagnum peat. So yeah, that's that. Of course, do your own research, find what echoes the best within yourself, and go with that route. But this is just what echoes for me. So thought I would share. Okay, so that is it for this video. I hope you found this information useful or helpful, or I don't know, something good. I hope it did something for you good. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!